Every secure connection begins with a negotiation. Before a single byte of protected data is exchanged, two systems have a brief conversation about how they will communicate. Which encryption algorithms they both support, which authentication methods are acceptable, which version of the protocol to use. Each side announces what it can do, and they agree on the strongest option they have in common. That negotiation is where downgrade attacks begin. An attacker positioned between the two systems does not need to break the strong encryption. They intercept the negotiation and modify it, removing the strong options before either side sees the other's announcement, leaving only the weak ones. Both systems believe they are doing the best they can with what is available. They settle on something the attacker can work with. The connection proceeds, and neither side knows the negotiation was tampered with. This is not a theoretical attack path. SSL stripping, POODLE, drown, beast, freak. These are real attacks against real protocol negotiations that affected real systems in production, some of them for years before they were discovered and patched. Each one worked by forcing a connection to use a weaker cipher, an older protocol version, or a less secure key exchange than the systems were capable of. But TLS is only the most visible surface for downgrade attacks. The same logic, force the system into a weaker mode than it would otherwise use, applies to authentication mechanisms, identity protocols, and the negotiation of trust itself. And in many of those cases, the downgrade is not caused by an attacker at all. It is a design decision that quietly undermines every security control built on top of it. A downgrade attack has a specific structure that distinguishes it from other categories of identity attack. It requires three conditions to be present simultaneously. First, the system must support multiple authentication or encryption modes with different strength levels. A system that only supports one mode cannot be downgraded. There is nowhere weaker to go. The vulnerability is created by backward compatibility, by the need to support older clients and legacy systems, by the engineering decision to offer a fallback rather than reject connections from weaker peers. Second, the negotiation between stronger and weaker modes must be manipulable. If the selection of authentication mode is cryptographically protected, signed by a trusted party before either side sees it, an attacker cannot substitute a weaker option. If the negotiation is unprotected, modification is straightforward. Third, the weaker mode must be exploitable. Not every downgrade creates a usable attack. A system that falls back from AES 256 to AES 128 has been downgraded but is still practically secure. A system that falls back from authenticated encryption to a null cipher, or from MFA to password only, has been downgraded into a position the attacker can use. All three conditions have to be true. But in systems built with backward compatibility as a priority, which describes most enterprise environments, all three are often true simultaneously, in multiple places, without anyone having performed a deliberate analysis of the combined effect. Protocol-level downgrade attacks are the best documented and the most technically precise. TLS, Transport Layer Security, is negotiated between client and server at the start of every HTTPS connection. The negotiation includes the protocol version, the cipher suite, and the key exchange mechanism. Modern TLS 1.3 eliminates a large class of downgrade possibilities by removing weak cipher suites entirely, and by encrypting the handshake itself so that modifications to it are detectable. TLS 1.2, which is still widely deployed, does not have these properties. POODLE, padding oracle on downgraded legacy encryption, exploited the fact that many servers at the time would fall back to SSL 3.0 if TLS failed. SSL 3.0 had a padding oracle vulnerability that allowed session cookie decryption. The attacker did not need to break TLS. They just needed to make TLS appear to fail, triggering the fallback, and then exploit the legacy protocol they had forced the connection onto. The pattern repeats across protocols. SMTP email servers negotiate whether to use TLS for message delivery. An attacker performing an SMTP downgrade strips the start TLS advertisement from the server's response before the sending server sees it. The sending server, believing TLS is unavailable, delivers the message in plaintext. The email was always intended to be encrypted. The negotiation said otherwise. HTTP Strict Transport Security, HSTS, exists specifically to prevent this for web connections. It tells the browser that this domain must always use HTTPS, even if a connection attempt says otherwise. But HSTS only helps after the first visit, only if the browser has cached the policy, and only for the connection it protects. It does not generalize to other protocols or other negotiation surfaces. Authentication mechanism downgrade is less discussed than protocol downgrade, but produces more directly exploitable outcomes. Many applications that require MFA also maintain a fallback path. If the MFA provider is unavailable, if the user's device cannot be reached, if the authentication flow encounters an error, the application falls back to password-only authentication rather than failing closed. The reasoning is availability. An authentication system that locks everyone out when it has a connectivity problem is an operational problem, so the fallback exists. An attacker who can simulate an MFA provider outage by blocking traffic to the authentication server, by triggering rate limiting, by exploiting an error condition in the authentication flow, can force every login attempt into the fallback path. Now the application is accepting passwords without MFA, not because MFA was bypassed, but because the system was convinced that MFA was unavailable. The same pattern applies to Windows authentication protocols in enterprise environments. Windows supports multiple authentication mechanisms and will negotiate down the list if a stronger one fails. Forcing the negotiation to bypass Kerberos and fall back to NTLM, which has weaker security properties and is vulnerable to relay attacks, is a known technique in internal network attacks. The attacker does not need to beat Kerberos, they just need to make Kerberos appear unavailable for the negotiation. OAuth and OpenID Connect flows have their own downgrade surfaces. Applications that support both modern PKCE secured flows and older implicit flows for backward compatibility can sometimes be induced to use the implicit flow, which sends tokens in URL fragments where they can be logged, cached, and intercepted by manipulating the parameters of the authorization request. The third surface is the most abstract and the hardest to detect, because it does not always involve an attacker at all. Systems make access decisions based on the trust level of the identity making the request. A high assurance identity, one that was proofed in person, authenticated with a hardware key, and has an active session from a managed device, receives different access than a low assurance identity. This is the principle that adaptive authentication and step-up authentication are built on. The level of access granted should be commensurate with the level of assurance established. Trust level downgrade happens when an identity's assurance level is treated as higher than it actually is, either because the system made an incorrect inference, because the assurance metadata was not propagated correctly through a federated flow, or because a high assurance session was extended into a context where it should have triggered re-authentication. Consider a user who authenticates with a hardware key at the start of the day. High assurance. Their session persists for 8 hours. 4 hours in, they switch to an unmanaged personal device that is already logged into the same SSO session. The session token is high assurance. The context is not. If the application trusts the session token without evaluating the current device context, it is granting high assurance access on a low assurance device. No attacker modified anything. The downgrade happened because the trust level was recorded at authentication time and never re-evaluated against the current reality. This is context collapse. The assurance that was valid in one context is being applied in a different one where it was never established. Zero trust architectures are specifically designed to prevent this by evaluating trust continuously rather than once. But continuous evaluation requires continuous signals, device posture, network location, behavior, and most systems do not collect those signals with the granularity needed to act on them meaningfully. All three downgrade surfaces share an origin in the same design decision, the choice to fail open rather than fail closed when a stronger mode is unavailable. Fail open means, if the strong option does not work, use the weak one. The connection succeeds, the user gets in, the service stays available. The cost is paid somewhere downstream, often invisibly, often much later. Fail closed means, if the strong option does not work, the connection fails. The user does not get in. The service is unavailable for that interaction. The cost is paid immediately, visibly, by someone who will file a support ticket. Organizations consistently choose fail open because the cost of failing open is diffuse and delayed, and the cost of failing closed is immediate and visible. An authentication failure generates a help desk ticket within minutes. A downgraded connection generates a security incident months later, after an attacker has had time to use it. This is not irrational. Availability is a genuine requirement, and a security control that makes the system unusable has failed in a different way. But the decision to fail open needs to be made explicitly, with full awareness of what the fallback path enables, and with compensating controls that make the weaker path harder to exploit. What almost never happens is that the fallback is designed in. The security implications are not analyzed. The weaker path remains available indefinitely, and nobody remembers that it exists until it appears in an incident report. Downgrade attacks do not break strong security. They move the interaction to a place where strong security does not apply, and they can do it because the system was designed to allow that movement. The strongest cipher suite in your configuration is irrelevant if the negotiation can be forced onto the weakest one. The most secure authentication mechanism you support is irrelevant if an attacker can convince the system that it is temporarily unavailable. The highest assurance level you issue is irrelevant if the system that relies on it does not verify that the assurance is still current. In every case, the vulnerability is not in the strong mode. It is in the distance between the strong mode and the weakest fallback the system will accept, and in the assumption that the choice between them happens fairly.